Hi, my name is Janine Maxwell, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about my personal journey to faith. A lot of you will remember where you were on September 11th in 2001. I am a Canadian and should have been at home in Canada working at my desk, but I was actually in New York City when the first plane crashed into the Twin Towers. I saw with my own eyes when the second plane crashed. And I was there with a group of friends and work associates, and we were at a conference for marketing to kids because I owned a large marketing agency in Canada. My husband was on an airplane that day. He was also outside of the country of Canada, and he was flying to Chicago. So as the world saw what was happening that day, as I ran from my hotel for 60 blocks to get away from what I was told were bombs in Grand Central Station, I knew my husband was on an airplane. And when he landed in Chicago, he was stuck on the tarmac for 6 hours knowing that I was in New York City. Meanwhile, both of our children were on the other side of the border in Canada. The whole world flipped upside down that day. Many people watching this will know exactly where you were that day and what happened and who called you and what went from there. And my life certainly flipped upside down. Took me 2 days to get home back to Canada. The borders were closed. It took my husband a couple of days to get back home. And finally, our family was reunited. But I was afraid. I was living in fear, and I was trying to figure out why did I survive? Why did so many people die that day? And my story is nothing like so many people's story, but my life changed, and my journey to faith changed then, because even then, I believed in Jesus. I owned a large marketing agency. I was married, had a wonderful husband with 2 children and still do. And I had Jesus, so he was in my top 3, as I always say. But God is a jealous God, and that was not acceptable to him. And so when I got back home, I really slid into a depression, trying to think, what is the meaning of life and why am I here? Why do I have the wealth that I have? Why do I have the influence I have? Why did I live? And so I started reading a book that talked about, I think chapter 2 said, you are not an accident. And I thought, wow, I don't know who this author is, but I know I was an accident because I know that my mother was 15 years old when she got knocked up in the backseat of a car, 1963 in Northern Ontario, and I was absolutely an accident. And I was okay with that because I was adopted into a wonderful family. I was raised had a great life, so it was okay. But you can't tell me that I wasn't an accident because I know that I was. Well, then I go on to read these scriptures that actually tell me that I wasn't an accident. And I said, I believed in Jesus. So I'm reading the scriptures that you're not an accident and that God had a plan for my life. So then I'm thinking, okay, if I was not an accident and my mother went through all this pain and suffering at 15, she was kicked out of her house, sent away for a home for unwed girls, I better not screw this up. I better find out what God's plan for my life is. So I start trying to figure out, okay, what am I doing? What does God want me to do? Well, I end up meeting with some friends who I'd gone to university with 20 years before in the United States. They're also Canadian. And I meet with them and I'm at, what are you guys doing now? And the guy says, well, I'm a videographer and I now travel to Africa and around the world, and I take pictures and video of children living on the street, and street kids, and then I bring them back to Canada and we raise money to build orphanages. And he says the dreaded question, what do you do? I'm like, well, I'm a capitalist pig. I have clients, my clients, we had the largest marketing agency in Canada. We had clients like Disney and Kellogg's and Gillette. And so I was a little embarrassed at my answer. But then I had what I thought was a great idea. I'll go to Africa with my friend and I'll see what he does, and then I'll find the meaning of life and I can get out of this depression, get away from my own anxiety, and I'll do something good, and then I can refocus on work. What a great idea. So as a marketer, of course, I think all my ideas are great. So I tell this guy that I think I'm going to go to Africa with you and your wife. And he starts to sweat like, great, we're taking Janine to Africa. So I, get on the plane. It was 6 weeks later. We're going to Zambia. I don't even know where Zambia is. I'm a planner, but I was busy. So, pull out the thing in the front of the seat and look up, where's Zambia? Oh, I'm going to Lusaka. So, 2 days later, we land in Lusaka, Zambia. I've got my nice little safari outfit that I bought, and we go and they check us into what I thought would be a hotel, and it was an HIV/AIDS testing center in 2003, and I was like, whoa, that wasn't really what I was expecting. And then off we go to find the street kids. Now, I hadn't really asked what a street kid was because I was on the mission to find the meaning of life, right? And we're looking for street kids. So off we go. It's midnight, and we're driving with some people who know what they're doing, and I'm just an observer, and my friend is there with his camera, and his wife is there. She's the person who's going to do the interviews. And we get out of the car. We're downtown Lusaka, and I see this. I don't see any kids. There's no kids to be seen, but I see this pile of garbage that has got to be 30 feet long. Just mounds of plastic and cardboard. And I'm thinking, wow, I don't know about a street kid problem, but they certainly have a garbage collection problem. So as I'm walking along, looking kind of like a lion hunt, I feel foolish saying that now, but all of a sudden I see something move out of the corner of my eye. And as I focus in on it, it was a child. There was a child wrapped up in garbage, lying on the street. And I had to stop because I'm like, there's a child there. He said, that's a street kid. And then I realized that all of this garbage are street kids. They're all living there. And this child was 6 years old. As we started talking to him, he'd been living there for 3 years. And these little kids, their parents had died of AIDS or poverty or the likes. And here's these kids, they've gone to Lusaka and they're looking for love, they're looking for help, and they end up in these gangs. And the little kids are raped every night by the bigger kids. The bigger kids take the little ones and stuff them into windows or stuff them into garbage cans so they can pull the food out so they can eat out of the garbage cans. And that's how they're living. And I'm thinking, how did I not know this? But I had a great idea. And of course, as I said before, I think my ideas are great. So I say to the man who's hosting us, I'm going to go home. I'm going to use my wealth, use my influence, and I'm going to raise money, and we're going to build a home for these boys. What a great idea. And he was very gracious, and he said, white Canadian lady, what a great idea. But tonight on the streets of Lusaka, Zambia, there are 75,000 children living. And I couldn't fathom that number. And then from there, a couple days later, we went to Nairobi, Kenya, where there were 500,000 children living on the streets of Nairobi, Kenya. And that was just 2 cities. And at that time, my life changed. Because I couldn't go back to my other life. I couldn't go back to my fancy car, my big house. Because the kids were still living there. And we weren't even at the peak of the AIDS pandemic yet. And I just knew that if I wasn't an accident, and if God had a plan for my life, that I had to do something. I promised not to cry through this whole thing, but while I was in Kenya, I started talking to some of these young girls, and they were telling me their stories, and they were sitting, waiting to tell the story to my friend and his wife. And they would share with me that when they were 12, 13, 14 years old, they would have to have sex for food. Their parents had died or left them, abandoned them, and they would have to go and meet a man down the street, and he would give them a loaf of bread if they'd have sex with him. And these were young girls. And not only would they end up with STDs or HIV and AIDS, but a lot of them would get pregnant. So I'd say to them, well, where's the baby? You've already had a baby? Oh, yes, I've had 2 babies or 3 babies. Well, where are the babies? Well, they would say, most of us don't even know when we're pregnant because we don't have anyone to talk to about it. And we don't talk about sex, in our families. And so they would go to an outhouse, or they call it a pit latrine, and they would give birth into the pit latrine, and the baby would die there. Or some other girls said, no, that's not what we did. We would have the baby in the forest, and then we put it in a plastic bag. We'd tie the bag, and we'd put it just over there in that river. Janine, do you see the river over there? I'd say yes. And I'm thinking, is this true? Oh, come with us. So they walked me through this thick African grass and take me to this river that kind of looks like it's been dammed up by plastic bags. And they say that's where the babies are. And I didn't know how to function. I didn't know what to do. And so I got back home, and I didn't speak for 2 weeks, which was very unusual in my home. And I just knew that I had to do something. I knew that my life was going to be focused in Africa. I knew that I was being called there. There was nothing I could do. to not want to serve. And we know in Jeremiah, he says, the plans I have for you. Well, I didn't know what God's plan was for me, but I knew that he had a plan. I knew that he saved me on 9/11, and I knew that there was something that I was called to do. Now, my husband was never, ever, ever going to Africa. I started traveling. I was helping rescue babies. I was helping rescue children off the street, and he said he would never, ever go to Africa. But this was the beginning of my faith journey, and his faith journey, we'll talk about it another time. But that's how my faith journey started. And really, as I said at the beginning, my faith journey started when I was young. I was already a follower of Jesus. I knew who he was. I went to church. My family was there. But I really didn't have him as the highest priority in my life. And he flipped that back upside down and right-sided so that God was first in my life, and then my family, and then my business. And that's how it began. That's how I ended up moving forward and helping children. And then I ended up moving to Africa. I actually now live in a little country called Eswatini. And you're going to hear a lot more about that journey as we continue. So today I encourage you to just start thinking about taking that first step in your faith journey. What is God calling you to do? What are you thinking about? What's on your mind that you think I could, or I should, or I think, but you're not sure? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Let's start this journey together. Come and join me, and let's take the first step in our faith journey.